back to the Momentary Mind. Today we are talking about scarcity, what it is, how it works, how it affects us, and how it can get us to do things that we wouldn't normally otherwise do. So hope you enjoy. Don't get too much into the physiological aspects of what's going on, but just know that for the most part, the body works on autopilot. It wants to operate at what's called homeostasis. Think of this as a cool, calm, collected baseline. From a psychological standpoint, this is where we make our best decisions, our logic is solid, we're least affected by the influences around us. So when it comes to something like scarcity, what we're hoping to do is to affect an emotional arousal. Think of this as a blip. If I can move you off of your homeostasis baseline, I have a greater opportunity to get you to make a decision that maybe goes against your better judgment. It isn't something you would normally do. I'm sure we can all look back on it and think of times where we made a decision we thought, why did I do that? It's possible that something like scarcity affected an emotional response and kind of moved you off of that point. So what do you do to combat that? Take a breath. All of these things, whether it be scarcity or any other points that we'll cover, you'll feel it inside of you. You'll feel your blood pressure kind of raising, maybe your breath is shortened, and you'll kind of get to a point to where you'll know that this is happening to you. What do? You take a breath. Take a step back, give yourself an opportunity to get back to homeostasis. The body wants to be in homeostasis, your mind wants to be at homeostasis, and so give yourself an opportunity to get back to this point to where you think you can make these decisions, and maybe you do make that same decision, and maybe you don't, but at least you have an opportunity to make this unencumbered from the influences around you. So where does all of this come from? Well, back to childhood development, and think about the toddler years, so terrible twos as they may call it, is around the time that you start developing your own individuality. You start recognizing that you are separate from your mom and that you have your own needs, your own wants, and your own desires. And you start understanding that there is more freedom. And freedom comes with positives and negatives. When you don't have a frame of reference, it's possible that these freedoms start to feel like losses when you can't have something. And we start developing this sort of internal angst when we can't have something because of this feeling of loss. And you'll start recognizing that scarcity taps in to this sort of feeling of loss that goes all the way back to when we were 2 years old. Also part of why maybe you see some people in things like Black Friday acting like 2-year-olds. But this is kind of where it starts. If you think about from the aspects of where it's pulling from us, when things like scarcity and this compliance factor that's kind of hitting into getting us to try and do something, it's really tapping into this sort of base concern that we started feeling from the area of 2 years old. Scarcity specifically and how it affects us, first we need to understand how we value things. So if we think about the value meter inside of us, if I say to you that something is rare, what does that mean? Well, it probably makes it more desirable. Probably think it's more expensive. It's definitely harder to get. And again, anything that has a limited supply taps into this idea that we had back when we were 2, this sense of loss when something is taken away from us. And so when you see things like while supplies last, limited supply only, hurry, it affects this value meter inside of us that makes us need something. Even if it's something that we didn't necessarily want in the first place, the idea that it's going to be taken away from us increases that value inside of us. We can see this in our own lives in a couple of different ways. You think about in your own house, there's probably something you have that's in storage. It's in the garage, it's in a storage closet. You clearly have value for it because you still have it, but you don't look at it, you don't take it out, you don't play with it. But if somebody were to throw it away, immediately that value meter inside of us would be increased for this item and we would assign a greater value to it. And so this sort of rebound effect is called psychological reactance. You see this, another example would be, suppose at your work they offer a free meal every single Friday. A sort of free meal Friday, but you don't really like the food, you never really participate, you actually bring your own lunch, and you never really participate in the Free Meal Friday. However, if your work were to suddenly discontinue the Free Meal Friday, the internal value meter inside of you would increase to the degree that you would probably complain that they were removing something that you actually weren't participating in the first place. And you see this in other example of reactance would be when Procter and Gamble decided to discontinue coupons for some of their items. Now the redemption rate on coupons is really low, and so Procter and Gamble decided to remove the coupons. However, they would lower the actual price of the item, in effect giving you the discounted rate for the item. You just wouldn't have to find the coupon anymore, ideally making it easier for the consumer. However, what they found was a huge increase in negative attention to the idea that they were taking away the coupons, which weren't being used in the first place. And so you can see that the value of the coupon for most people was increased when it was taken away, even though the end result was the same. Taps into this idea of losing and loss and scarcity, and all of how that plays into our psychological framework, is the idea that competition increases value. So you would see this in buying a house or buying a car, or even on things like Black Friday, is scarcity on its own is already tapping into the emotional arousal of losing. You add in competition for something, it increases the value to an even greater degree. So whether you would see the value of a house being $200,000, the idea that someone else is competing for that scarce resource could drive your internal value meter beyond just for the sake of not wanting to lose out on a very scarce item. So keep in mind that if you find yourself competing for something, whether it be tickets for a concert or anything else, that you will probably move beyond your internal value meter that you would have had at your normal kind of homeostasis line, and that you can get caught up in the emotion of scarcity and actually do something that you wouldn't normally have said that you would have done. Just something to keep in mind, that all of these things that are happening to you, you can feel. So when you sense inside of yourself that you're kind of feeling a little on edge or a little excited, know that you'll see this in auctions too. If you're bidding on an item on eBay or in an auction house, specifically when you can feel the competition happening in the energy, you can spend more than you would have spent on an item just for the sake of not wanting to lose out on a scarce item. So that leads us kind of like the three takeaways that I want to leave you with here. One is that scarcity taps into our fears of loss. That's really what it's boiling down to, is this fear of losing. Doesn't matter what it is, just that fear. And you can imagine what that feels like, the fear of losing a person. That feeling can be tapped into for an item as well, just because of how we can kind of emotionally arouse and not have you be cognitively thinking of it in the right way. So again, be aware of when you get excited based on bidding for something that's scarce. There's a greater motivator for losing than gaining. The fear of losing something will far outweigh the kind of perspective of gaining something. So if I were to call you in the morning and say, hey, I've got this great idea for you to, if you invest with me, you'll gain $30,000. That sounds really great. But if I call you in the morning and I say, if you don't invest with me, you're going to lose $30,000, immediately the fear of loss will spark, even if it's a couple of percentage points higher than the fear of the prospect of gaining. The whole idea of getting compliance is to move as many needles in the positive as you can to move someone off of an indecisive position or away from kind of a hardened position to the point to where you can actually convey a message that is more receptive. So losing, in terms of how you present something to somebody, losing is a greater motivator than gaining. And take a breath. You will feel these things happening. If you look back on all these motions, you will know in the moment that these things are happening to you. And if you don't find time to maybe take a breath or walk outside, get some fresh air, or to just walk away from it and know that if it was something that you were going to get, it'll still be available. like the car. Nobody wants you, no car dealership wants you to leave and have a better idea of whether or not it's something you want to spend. They want to get you caught up in the moment of that car where there's only one left on the lot. So my suggestion to you is just to take a breath, be in touch with your body, know when these things are happening to you, and you may still make this decision, but at least you'll know. And now you know. All right, thanks, guys.